So before we get any further into that, because I'm going to be throwing around these terms, I know it. I just know it's going to happen. So we're clear, right? So personal development, self-actualization, and self-empowerment are all pretty much the same thing. But self-realization is a very different thing. And that's one of the first points I want to try to help you see, or see if you can't understand where I'm coming from and why it's important. Why does this matter even with personal development? I thought we were going to talk about personal development. Well, you're going to find we probably won't talk as much about that as we're going to talk about self-realization, because that's what I'm going to try to pull in here for you to provide something different and something new for you to consider as you consider, your personal development. Like, say you're somebody who's really interested in that, right? You're interested in growing yourself and becoming better and getting better in your relationships, maybe starting businesses. There's a million reasons you can get into personal development, right? Whatever the reason is, I personally believe that you're going to have better results if you at least sprinkle in a little bit of self-realization, or you understand where that's coming from, so that way you can kind of head in the right direction no matter what you're doing with development. Because that's what I said in my, like, the subtitle. I said where to start, right? It's like personal development, where to start. And that's because if you don't know which direction to head in, or you don't have a general sense of that, it's very likely you're gonna end up lost. You're gonna end up somewhere that you actually didn't even want to be, or you didn't know that you didn't mean to be, I guess, in a way. So here's what I'm trying to say. Let's summarize the difference between self-development, personal development, self-empowerment, and self-realization. Well, one of the easiest ways that I could express this for you is to tell you that the place from which they come, right? Like we said, all these development ones they come from a certain perspective on life. And self-realization comes from another one, now a completely different perspective, actually. And this is what I want to share with you, one of the first things that I'm hoping to clarify for you. All development is trying to gain something. It's coming from a perspective of, I want something more from life, or I want to learn more. I want to gather something that I don't already have. Self-realization is exactly the opposite, actually. It is understanding the power of letting go. It's more concerned with opening than it is with gaining something. So why? Why is there such a dramatically different viewpoint or perspective on life? Well, it's because of that, because it comes from a completely different orientation. All development comes from the perspective, and I shouldn't say that like that. Actually, I want to try to be as clear and accurate and honest and truthful as I can be. So it's not that it has to come from that, but almost all development that you know, and almost any impulse you're going to have to try to do personal development or become self-empowered, or is going to be because there's a sense of lack. Like, you need this thing in order for you to fulfill yourself, in order to fulfill your destiny, to have a feeling of self-empowerment, of self-worth, of self-esteem. You have to gain something to get that. Well, self-realization takes the polar opposite view. It says, you already got it. You already are it. If you followed any of my stuff, I hope this sounds familiar. This is certainly going to be the perspective that I'm trying to share with you. Now, this doesn't mean, by the way, that when you're coming from an orientation of self-realization, that you can't try to, you can't do any development, you can't try to gain anything. This is one of the first things that when somebody realizes this truth, which we're going to get into why this is true in just a second. But when you start to realize this, when somebody starts to get interested in self-realization, it's very common to all of a sudden have the sense that, it's about letting go. It's about getting rid of stuff. I got to sell everything and, leave my husband and leave my wife and go and move into a mountain and start praying and meditating. That's the natural impulse, because it's all about letting go. And this is a common myth to self-realization, that that's what you have to do. The other myth to self-development, to self-empowerment, to personal development, is what it actually can offer you. If you look closely, why is it that you want to gain these things? Well, if we're honest, if we really take the time to look, which again, as soon as we start doing that, we're starting to step into the territory of self-realization more. But why? Now, okay. Because you have this underlying sense of you need something, right? But what are you hoping to get? See, this is the crux of it. What is it you're hoping to get by starting your new business, by improving your relationship, by learning a new language? I mean, there's a million things, right, that you can develop, that you can start to grow. And what is it you're hoping to get from that? Well, it's always going to come down to some sense or some feeling that you're looking for. And usually, again, if you're looking closely enough, it's going to be that you're trying to fulfill something, some sense of fulfillment. And this fulfillment is the search for these three things that I always like to talk about, right? It's the search for joy, different than happiness, as I like to talk about. This is the purest thing that you can hope for, and that you're hoping to get from this thing, right? You're hoping that you'll get a sense of joy from it, a sense of purpose, a sense of freedom. Like, in other words, now you can do this, you know this, you have this, you can do more, you can be more, right? That's a sense of freedom that we're looking for. And a sense of peace. This is what we're hoping for. If we really look the deepest root of what it is we're hoping. Because why else would we do it? I mean, sure, it could be fun, but there's always going to be some underlying desire for one of those three or four things. Self-realization comes from the perspective that you already have all of those things. So, all of your desperate searching for it isn't going to be able to provide it. And indeed, this is what we find if we follow the path of self-empowerment, personal development far enough. You know, when I made that comment in the other stream, I said that, you're almost certainly going to walk through the territory, the landscape of self-empowerment on your way to self-realization. And the main reason that that's going to happen is because you're going to have to exhaust all the other possibilities, actually, right? You're going to be trying to find something outside of yourself to fulfill yourself. You're going to try to gain something. Self-realization says you already have it. And so therefore, all you're searching for it, you're looking in the wrong place. It's like one of the famous ways to talk about this in spirituality is to say, like, you go to the guru and he says, well, you already are it. And they're like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? I'm a mess. So how can I already be it, right? But he's trying to point you inward, because one of the ways they talk about that is, look, it's like you're standing in your house and you're asking me how to get home. Well, I can't really tell you much about, you're there. You got to pay closer attention. You got to realize, by the way, this is part of why it's self-realization. You got to realize you're already there. You already have it. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't work on development, because there's certain things that you can still get that's different than this realization. But the things that you can get, here's a great example, my personal example, okay? I'm going to share this one because we're sitting here sharing this space together. You are looking at me in my natural environment, right? And you're seeing me in a space that I dreamed of creating. I spent my whole life, I remember my father actually passed away on this property, and it was a very tumultuous time, and he spent his time here. As I say, we spent a lot of time together, and I was building the house with my own two hands at that point. And he said, you always said, Adrien, that you wanted to build a house in the woods. Even as a kid, that was something you said, and it's true. And I did. I always wanted to. So here's what I'm trying to share with you. It was a goal. It was a developmental thing. It was a self-empowerment sort of thing. I set lots of goals to get there, and I obviously accomplished all of them, right? Because here we sit in my beautiful home on my property that's in the midst of the woods, right? So, but I remember it wasn't long after I built this home that I actually went through a little crisis. And I realized that what I was trying to get from this home, it could never deliver. Now, does that mean I regret building the home? Of course not. I hope that helps illuminate what I'm trying to say. That doesn't mean we don't do things like that. It's just that we can't expect it to fulfill us in a deep way. Because I found myself troubled again, right? That's what happened, even though this was one of the bigger goals I'd ever set in my life. And by the way, before that, I had accomplished plenty. And I had never been able to find that thing, that sense of peace and freedom and joy. That's because it was sitting inside of me. It was sitting there all along. And if I kept looking outside, I was never going to find it that way. I hope that is, there's some great amounts of clarity there for you. Because what I'm trying to point to you is that self-development, personal development is wonderful. It's fantastic. As long as we know its limits. It's going to be fantastic for starting a business. It's going to be fantastic for even improving your relationships, though self-realization can do an even better job of that because it comes very naturally instead of like this contrived trying to work on, listening skills and, all this sort of stuff, which is useful. I don't mean to, but when you come into this place of peace and freedom and joy, things like that, your relationships start to naturally fall into a rhythm that's much more pleasant. You're much more of a gift to the people around you, So again, just to make sure it's clear, we want to make sure that we understand what personal development can deliver and what it can't. Again, it's going to be great for learning the language and all that sort of stuff, right? So that would be the second point, right? The first point was that they're different. The second point is what can they deliver, okay? The third thing I would like to talk to you about when we talk about development is the fact that we do, even though we already have this thing from the perspective of self-realization, there is an experience of development, right? I said this in one of the thing I released, the little video I released to advertise this. And it was that, we're all developing, right? I mean, you can't get away from it. I mean, we were kids at one point and now we're adults and more than likely. And then we become elderly. I mean, there's just a certain amount of natural development that occurs. So, and because there is that natural rhythm to development, there's also a natural way of going about it. So what I'm trying to say is that here's the easiest way I could think of to try to explain this. If you want to learn math, now let's say, because we're talking about self-realization, so, in juxtaposing it with self-empowerment or personal development. If you're trying to talk about self-realization, if we want to learn at that level, that's like if I was trying to teach you trigonometry, okay, with math. By the way, which I couldn't do. So let's just make sure that's clear. I don't want to act like I could teach you. So you can't, in order to learn trigonometry, we got to understand basic math, right? I mean, that's just, you can't start with trigonometry. You can't even start with basic math, right? I mean, anybody who has kids knows this whole rhythm here, right? You have to learn your numbers first. Then you have to learn how to count to 10, to 100, to 1,000, to 1,000,000, right? Like, there's so many steps to get, and then you have to be able to do basic math, and then you have to be able to do multiplication and division, and then algebra, and then all these things have to happen in order for you to understand trigonometry, right? Well, see, this is the thing that I think that self-development doesn't understand for the most part. Its perspective is that if I get this thing, that's good. I got it. That's all that matters. What I'm saying, this comes back to that if you're not pointed in the right direction thing. If you don't understand some of the basics about yourself, is what I'm trying to say, self-realization, right? You're not going to be able to understand trigonometry. You're not going to be able to understand self-realization. You're not going to be able to understand personal development, actually. This whole idea for doing this live stream came from last live stream where I just mentioned I was talking about thoughts and emotions and why do I talk about that so much? And I'm like, maybe I'm going to do another, live stream about that. So this is part of that conversation. Why do I talk about thoughts and emotions and desires so much? I write about it constantly. I talk about it constantly. And that's because most of us want to skip that step of learning trigonometry. When we are focused on self-development, believe it or not, even though you'll get some hints of this, but it's a limited perspective on it because it doesn't understand the big picture. So the big picture is that self-realization thing, right? Your thoughts and emotions and desires, which, by the way, that word desire really starts to dial into that impetus behind self or personal development, right? Like you're looking to get something. If you don't understand those things, if you don't understand your own thoughts, emotions, and desires, you're going to not be able to get to the level of trigonometry. Like, I can talk to you about some really cool, beautiful spiritual things, and you'll be able to understand them to a point. And I would love to do that, by the way, and I think we will be doing that soon. I've been thinking about that too, because I want to keep doing these videos, and I would love to talk about something even deeper, right? But in order for us to go there and for it to mean something, to mean enough, you have to understand your thoughts, emotions, and desires. And there's really only one thing that you need to understand about it. Now, most of the time, like I said, in personal development, you're going to experience lots of talk about your thoughts and emotions and desires, but it's usually going to be about ramping them up or getting in touch with them. What do you want? What do you really want? And getting you emotionally stirred up, like I talked about Anthony Robbins would do, which I'm not, again, I'm not trying to say anything bad about the guy. But that's what you would do with your thoughts and emotions. This is not in line with self-realization. The one thing that you need to know, and maybe if you followed me enough, you probably know what I'm going to say. The one thing you need to understand about your thoughts, your emotions, and your desires is that they're not you. There's something that passes through you. If you don't understand that, and I start talking to you about the next level of spiritual stuff, if you want to say that, what'll happen is it'll get sucked into that same vortex because your calculations are going to come out wrong, because you haven't understood this level of the math problem. Does that make any sense? So until you really understand, and I mean really, like, how they make you write out all of the, how did you get to the solution of your math problem? You have to write it all down, and you're like, I know the answer, right? And they want you to, well, until you understand that you are not your thoughts, emotions, and desires at the level where you can write it out like that, I'm just trying to play with the metaphor, you're not going to understand the next level. You're not going to be able to do the calculations right. It's going to get sucked into it's going to get warped. The equation won't come out right. This is the problem with self-development. I don't want to say problem. It's not a problem. Self-development is perfect, is wonderful, as long as you understand these things, right? If you think that acquiring the house is going to make you happy, is going to make your life perfect, your calculation is going to come out wrong. Every time. Every time. I speak from this with such authority because I've explored it a ton. I spent decades with self-empowerment, self-development, personal development, self-actualization. I think that would be like the Maslow term for it. None of it bad. But it never delivered me the thing that I was really looking for. I acquired tons of things. That's where it does work. You'll get stuff, right? You're gaining things. I started all kinds of businesses. I've done a lot of things, right? But it didn't provide the freedom, joy, and peace and sense of purpose. This deep groundedness. It wasn't until I really understood my thoughts and emotions and desires, by the way, that I was able to see this thing. And see it is just the beginning, right? Then to start to be it is a whole something that is hard to express. It's very hard to express what that actually feels like and what that actually means in your life. Because you're still coming from, more than likely, most of us are still coming from that level of, thoughts, emotion, thinking that we are them. I'm just going to say it because it's an interesting, the level, if we were going to take the metaphor of the math, right, And where does thoughts, emotions, and desires fall on the spectrum of, trigonometry to learning your numbers? It's actually only about multiplication and division. It's that kind of still rudimentary, but 90% of us are still there. It's not a judgment, it's just a fact. So if you don't get that, again, the calculations are coming out wrong. This is part of why the world is in distress like it is, the human conundrum, so to speak, right? Because we're always pulled around by these thoughts, emotions, and desires. That's why there's no freedom. That's why we can't listen to each other. That's why I got so emotional talking about that simple fact last week, because without this knowledge of the fact that you are not your thoughts, emotions, and desires, you're going to get pulled around. You're not going to be able to listen to somebody. If you can't listen to somebody, you can't have a conversation. You can't unite. You can't connect. This is part of what starts to happen, though. See, if you can peek above this abyss almost of thoughts and emotions and start to realize, wow, get some space, as I'm always talking about, you'll immediately start to feel this connection that I'm always trying to talk about. To prove the perspective, or to do the best that I can do personally, this is the best that I've come up with sharing with you the perspective of self-realization, and how, to see that there is truth there, that you already have this. I've said this many times, but sometimes we need to hear it over and over and over again before it really hits in. How do you relax? Feeling relaxed. Relaxation is one of the greatest experiences a human being has, right? We seek it out like crazy. We'll plan, expensive, excessive vacations to try to manipulate our environment to make a perfect place and situation where we can feel relaxed, right? We'll make that perfect dinner and have that few drinks, all these different things so we can sit down and relax. We'll hang up the hammock and the blah, 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 right? We'll go through all these measures to feel a sense of relaxation, because it's a wonderful feeling. But what is happening when we relax? There's only one way that you can relax, as I've said many times. You have to let go. You have to let go of all your worries. You have to let go of all your things that you're trying to do. This comes back to like this. You can see how self-development can get in the way of this. Because you can't be thinking about all those things. You're not going to be relaxed. You're going to be amped up, which is appropriate sometimes, but you have to let go of all. You have to let go of all your fears, all your thoughts, all your wants and not want. That you have to let go of all that. Think about it. If you're sitting on the beach in your perfect environment and all you're doing is thinking about, okay, I want a drink. Hey, please, can I have another drink, please? And they're bringing that drink, and then you're like, yeah, I want something to eat. You're not relaxing. You're not relaxing until you let go of all that stuff. Now, sometimes a few drinks helps you do that. But once you let go of all that stuff, you get relaxed. Why? Why is it when you let go of all the things that I mentioned, do you feel relaxed? Because your true nature, because this underlying thing, your home where you are all the time, is good. It's already good. You're just too busy to notice it. This is self-realization in its simplest form. Anytime you've ever really deeply relaxed, you've experienced your true nature. You've tasted self-realization, the thing that they've been talking about for millennia in all the religions and all the spiritual teachers, and you are good. So, this is the truth of, like, self-development. Again, sometimes we can't know something unless we try it. I actually think that I was thinking about having this conversation with you, and maybe what am I going to do next week? And I think I'm going to commit to it right now. I'm feeling inspired to do it. So I'm going to share the story of the prodigal son, Because the story of the prodigal son in the Bible, this is a Christian parable that Jesus told, has such a profound meaning to it that I really want to, it will help you understand why sometimes you have to go through development in order to find something, why you have to go away from home in order to find home. That's actually the story of the prodigal son, you know? So I think that's what I'm going to commit to that right now. So it'll be really fun because we're going to go through the journey of what happens through that process. So sometimes self-development, back to what I was saying, personal development, helps you realize this thing because it's trial and error, right? You try this, like I build the home and I realize that wasn't it. Again, I don't regret building the home, but it helped me see that that wasn't it, you know? The other thing that I want to share with you today to try to get some clarity and you know, go below the surface here, like I try to say, bring more depth to this conversation, is that there's a difference, and there's a pretty big difference between development and evolution. Now, we could quibble over words and you know, I don't want to go there. Hopefully, I'm picking these words, and hopefully you'll understand the sentiment behind them, right? So one of the reasons I want to share this is it's really important for us to understand this as human beings. It helps us get in touch with the reality of you are not your thoughts, emotions, and desires. What I want to say to you that development is very different than evolution. Development is the level of gaining, right? It's where we find ourselves in our world. In other words, we're highly developed, and what that means is we've become very, very good at manipulating our environment. But if we look below the surface of that, which looks extraordinary, right? Again, I'm here streaming across the world and all these beautiful, wonderful, it's amazing stuff, by the way. I'm not trying to say anything bad about it. But if we think that just because we're able to do that we've evolved, I've got sad news for you. It's not true. Development is not the same thing as evolution. Just because we've developed all these things, we've gotten really good at manipulating our environment, doesn't mean we've evolved very far from the animal kingdom. And if you get really in touch with your thoughts, emotions, and desires, you'll see that this is true. You know, one of the simplest and saddest examples of this, right, is the power of the internet. I don't remember what I heard. I don't think I want to remember. I probably blocked it out, right? But the power of the internet, right? It has such an enormous potential to uplift us as human beings, to help us evolve as human beings. And it does fulfill this potential. Hopefully we're doing that right now. But they say some enormous amount of the internet is used for pornography only. This is an example of how we're not, even though we have the ability to manipulate things and to use things and to develop all kinds, it doesn't mean that we're evolved. We have a long way to go to get above that level of where all we care about is sex and pleasure and avoiding pain. These are the things I always talk about, right? Because if we don't get above that, by the way, we have the ability to do that. There's been probably millions of people to show that example, and all of us have actually probably delved into that a bit. But if we watch ourselves closely, we'll notice we're still ruled by these very primal and simple impulses, like sex, right? And there's nothing wrong with sex, by the way. It's just it has its proper place. It's not the purpose and meaning to life, right? And if we're constantly focused on that, this is what I mean by development too, right? You're not gonna, a whole lot of things you're gonna miss a whole lot of things, right? Deeper things, things that can bring a lot more fulfillment than a momentary, right? I don't care how good you are at it, it only lasts so long. So, and then you're just looking for it again, right? It's addiction. By the way, that's addiction, and that's addiction of all sorts. Whether this is the natural place that pursuing this, that this is the place that thoughts, emotions, and desires lead us, actually, is addiction of all forms. Now, they're not all equal, but we're going to, because the perspective is we need something, right? We're missing something. So we're always looking for something outside of us. This always leads to addiction of one form or another. So, this is my deepest intention in sharing all of this stuff to you. I ended with evolution. We have the potential to learn the trigonometry of human beings, to learn self-realization is an incredible gift to yourself. That perspective starts to fade, actually, as you approach it, but to yourself and to the world. So I want to encourage you. So many people think that self-realization, which a lot of times the end goal concept of that is enlightenment, right? To become enlightened is to be self-realized. They rule it out of their possibility as a human being because it's only been the very rare few, because I'm not selling everything I own and leaving my husband or wife, and so it's out for me. I'll just focus on development, which is good. Development's good, but I hope that I can inspire you to realize that you can have all those things. You can develop and evolve. You can have the house and the wife and the kid and be self-realized and realize that it's fun, but that's it. Does that make any sense? Like, this is what it can deliver. It can make your life more comfortable. It can make your life more full, like in a certain way. That's actually not even right, but it can make your life more interesting, maybe even in a way. It can open up certain things that would have been closed down to you. But it can't deliver joy, freedom, peace, and purpose. So don't shut out self-realization. It's there. You can't avoid it anyways, right? Every time you relax, you're going to start getting a taste of it, right? Even realizing that, the next time you find yourself relaxed, I hope that you think about what I just said, because you're tasting enlightenment. You're tasting your true nature. And believe it or not, if you start heading in that direction, you'll start experiencing it more and more and more. Now, by the way, there's a lot of stuff. These thoughts, these emotions, these desires, they're deeply rooted in your experience of life, in your experience of yourself. So there's going to be a journey to letting that go. Remember, this is the point, that this is the perspective of letting go, or of self-realization, is letting go. One of my favorite metaphors for that, I think it was Meister Eckhart who said it, I'm not sure though, is that it's not, when a sculptor comes to a piece of wood or a piece of slab of marble or something, right? They're not adding to it. They're taking it away. They're taking the unnecessary parts of it away to open up, to pull out the form that's there, right? Well, this is the perspective of realization. Like, you're letting go of the things that don't matter, that aren't you. And as you do, this beautiful sculpture emerges, right? So I encourage you, as you're developing anyways, as I said, right, to consider self-realization. Don't rule it out. I hope that you can see some of the merit there. It's tricky business because it's not our common perspective. There's very few of us that actually come from that perspective, and we don't see it modeled that much. The rest, self-development, is modeled all over the place, right? And then the not even caring about development at all is also modeled all over the place, right? But you could be one of the models, not because you're trying even, by the way, just by being it, by realizing your true nature, by finding, this is why meditation's so wonderful, by the way, right? Because you're relaxing to some degree. You're letting go, and you feel this sense. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. I want to say, too, please, if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit the like button and, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff really helps the YouTube discover me, so that this sort of information, hopefully that you found useful and interesting, can emerge in a more natural and organic way, so that we can start to evolve this world, right, a little bit. So I really encourage you, please do that. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe, hit the like button. All of those things, they make a difference. It really helps things. So I greatly appreciate it. I don't know if we have any questions. It doesn't look like it. No questions anywhere. That's fantastic. I thank you so much for your time. It's precious.